I was in the New Age a very, very long time. I didn't get into it like all of a sudden. It was slow, which is what happens with most people, because I was interested in different little things. I was actually interested in astrology in high school, and I was interested in other religions, and I was interested in the paranormal. And in college, those interests were still there, and I was also interested in Eastern religions after I did a project on Gandhi. And that got me very interested in Gandhi and Hinduism, and I really just kept wanting to know more. And so after college, I did more exploration and reading, just a wide variety of things. I also had these supernatural experiences, which verified to me that there was this spiritual, well, I thought of it as a spiritual world, you know, this other realm that we couldn't see. So I was very involved in the pursuit of spiritual truth, I guess you want to call it, and very interested in the Eastern religions, the paranormal, and the astrology. And so as time went by, I was also interested in communication with the dead. And actually that was my biggest interest for a while, and I read a lot of books on haunted houses and everything by this man named Hans Holzer, who's now dead, but he had a whole huge almost industry based on him going into homes or buildings that were supposedly still haunted, and he would figure out why, and he would get the supposed dead person's spirit to leave. So he was very, very popular. His books were very suspenseful and exciting. Anyway, I got very interested in this area, and for several years did a lot of reading on that. So the years went by, and finally a few years went by after college, and I decided that I really wanted to study things seriously. So I went to, there was a class that was being offered called Inner Light Consciousness. And Inner Light Consciousness was actually hosted at Quaker House. This was in Atlanta, Georgia, by the way, because I went to college in Florida, and then 3 of my friends from college ended up in Atlanta in a townhouse. And after college, briefly living with my parents, I moved into the townhouse in Atlanta and ended up there for really my whole New Age life was in Atlanta. So anyway, I was very interested in all these things, and I decided to take this class hosted by Quaker House, and I was going to the meetings at Quaker House. And Inner Light Consciousness introduced me to meditation, to remote healing. They called it chanting. A lot of Eastern ideas mixed in with sort of these practical methods. It was really basically New Age, but that term wasn't being used then. Nobody was using that term. I always told people I was interested in metaphysics. That's what I always said. Or, yeah, I don't even think I used the word spiritual, because that word actually wasn't used very much either. This time period is like around the late 70s that I'm talking about. And so then I took this course, and I was captivated by it. And we did this meditation every night, and on the last night, the teacher said, tonight, at the end of the meditation, you're going to meet your spiritual master. And your spiritual master will be with you the rest of your life. And you can do this meditation to contact him or her, but pretty soon you won't need to do the meditation. You'll just be able to contact him or her. And he or she will contact you spontaneously. So we went into the meditation, and it was a guided meditation. You know, he was saying things like, you picture this, and then you picture this, and you picture this. So that's a guided meditation or guided visualization. which actually is a form of hypnosis. And I saw at the end of it, he had a special part added on that we hadn't been doing. And through that process, I saw my spiritual master. And I felt that he was with me. When the meditation was over, we recounted what happened to us. He asked us to share with the others who we had seen or what had happened. And I really felt changed by that experience. And I felt that this spiritual master was with me. Now what this spiritual master is usually called is spirit guide. So this was a spirit guide. And after that, my plunge into the New Age really accelerated. I got a lot of experiences that just came to me. I got very interested in psychic phenomena. I got interested and I decided to continue to pursue the Eastern spiritual views, and I got involved for a while with the Tibetan Buddhist group, and I learned how to do Tibetan Buddhist meditation. And after being with them for a little while, I got interested in Zen Buddhism, and I made kind of a switch from Tibetan to Zen Buddhism. And meanwhile, I'm still, doing this other meditation, doing a lot of reading. And then I decided, after all of this experience, and I felt like I was soaking up all this knowledge, that I wanted to do something. I wanted to learn a skill that I could use to help people with their spiritual path. And it was astrology, of course, which had always dominated my interest very strongly. And there was a place in Atlanta called the Foundation of Truth that had a lot of classes, including classes on astrology. So I started, I did take some classes there, but there was another place I also took classes called the Daily Planets. And this was run by some astrologers, and they taught classes, and they also had clients there. So I took classes at both places. In Atlanta, they have an unusual situation. I don't know how active it is now, but at the time, you could get a certification from the city as an astrologer, but you had to take a 7-hour exam to show that you really knew astrology. And this exam was formulated by the Astrology Board of Examiners. And these were astrologers who would get together and come up with the exam. And then you would go to City Hall and take the exam at City Hall. And then you would get a letter later from City Hall as to whether you passed or not. If you passed, you'd go down to the City Licensing Bureau and you'd pay, I think it was $100 for a license for a year to practice astrology if you were in the city limits. So I was in the city limits, so to practice legally I had to have that license. But I did pass the exam, and I really was having clients already because I was practicing on them before I took the exam. So I was doing astrology professionally, and I was getting more and more clients. At the time I was married and had a small son. I mean, he was very small. He was a baby, actually. And I wanted to do something where I could be at home. That didn't happen for several years because it took a while to get enough clients for that to happen. So that didn't happen for about 5 or 6 years. Meantime, I'm still doing the Eastern meditation, and I've also taken yoga classes at this point. So I had my fingers in a lot of different pies there, just kind of a mixture of a lot of things, which is what the New Age is. And as time went by, I eventually became more involved in the Astrological Society. I became involved in the Astrology Board of Examiners, and I was chairperson for 3 years. So for 4 years I was on that board, and we would formulate the exams, send them to the city, then the city would collect them, send them to us to grade, and then we would tell the city who passed and who fail. So I also taught astrology, and then I became president of the Atlanta Astrological Society in June 1979. No, gosh, it was much later than that. 1989. I became president of the Astrological Society. So I was extremely involved, and I was teaching there, and I was on the speakers committee as well. So I was speaking at different places in Atlanta about astrology. All of this was very much the kind of the focus of my life, aside from my son. It was the most important thing to me, and I felt that it was my calling. I felt that I had been an astrologer in previous lives. I started believing in reincarnation very, very early on, even before I took any of those classes. I was believing in reincarnation. It's one of the first things that I accepted, and it made a lot of sense to me. So I had that belief system already, and I continued on this way. I was very hostile to Christianity and hostile to being told that I was doing anything wrong. And I did have encounters like that, and it made me very angry and even more hostile, because there was one guy I remember who wrote a letter. I was a writer too, and I wrote for a lot of New Age magazines. And one magazine would put our name and address at the end of our articles. And I got this letter from this man who said he was a minister. He lived in another state, and he wrote a letter and told me I was worshiping Satan. Or serving Satan, doesn't matter whether he said serving or worshiping. It really, really made me mad, because of course I didn't believe in Satan. And I thought, this is so stupid. How can he tell me that I'm serving Satan when I don't even believe in Satan? He's so ignorant. He's so self-righteous. I was just so mad. I think I wrote him a letter back, and I was just, I don't know what I said, but it was probably a very, very angry letter. And I had a few encounters like that. So I was very hostile to Christianity. I wanted nothing to do with it. I had exposure to it when I was younger. We grew up, my sister and I grew up in different countries. Initially, my childhood was spent overseas because of my father's job in the Foreign Service. So we went to different churches overseas. My mother was a Southern Baptist, at least nominally she was Southern Baptist. My father was an agnostic. And so I didn't have, it was not a Christian home at all. My mother never prayed. I never saw her look at the Bible. She never talked about the Bible at all. But if you ask her, she would say she was a Christian. She would just say it right away. I am a Christian. She was very adamant about it. But yeah, there was absolutely very little evidence of it. So I had been exposed, I'd gone to Sunday school when I was younger. I had a Bible and all of that kind of stuff. And I just had totally thrown this over because I saw it as boring and superficial and judgmental and narrow-minded. And that was my view of Christianity. So what happened was that my marriage came to an end, and I was getting money as an astrologer, but it wasn't enough for me and my son. And I had a client who offered me a part-time job in his office, and he was going to pay me quite well for this part-time job. And what he wanted me to do was to give him advice on the employees from their birth dates. So I was sort of like a secret astrologer on the job is what I was. I was actually down there in the office, in my own office. And sometimes he would give me busy work, but the real reason he had me there was to give him advice on the employees. So I took the job. I needed the money, and I was getting, I wasn't rich, but I was getting enough money for us to live on. And a few months after I started working, actually several months, I'd say a good maybe 8 months after I started working there, I started getting this very strange compulsion to go to a church. Now, I didn't go to church, so this was really bizarre, and I didn't want to go, and I resisted. And I thought it was my imagination at first, but it didn't go away, and it kept on, and the weeks passed, and it was still there, and in fact, it was stronger. And I could not understand it. It was actually making me angry. And I didn't understand it. And that was happening in the spring and the summer. And then in August, I went to an astrological conference in Oregon that was put on by the publisher of the magazine that I wrote for every month. And I did some workshops there. I came back to Atlanta. I figured that this feeling about going to church would be gone, but it wasn't gone. So I decided I would go to a church. And I thought, I'm just going to go get this out of my system. It's probably from a previous life. That's what I decided, because I figured I'd been a Christian in previous lives. Usually that gets a laugh. You all are so serious. You can laugh.
We're just trying to hear you because it's so light.
That's probably the only funny part. So you missed the funny part. So I went into this big church downtown and sat in the back on the end of the pew because I was planning to leave early, 15, 20 minutes into the service. I was just going to get up and go. Well, what happened is that the service began with music. Everyone stood, and they had a procession down the aisle with a young boy, carrying a cross. And as he walked by me, this very strange thing happened. I felt this, what I call a waterfall of love, falling on me from above, falling down through me. It's really hard to describe, but it was, what I was experiencing was God telling me he loved me, and a personal God. Now, the thing is, I didn't believe in a personal God. So that's what's really strange. But yet I knew this was very real. And I kind of started crying, and then I just stayed for the rest of the service. I was sort of stunned. I was in this sort of stunned state where I couldn't completely process what had happened, and I couldn't understand it. So what happened is that I decided to go back to the church the next Sunday, and I kept going every Sunday. Now, this was a very, very liberal, open-minded church that I was in, which is why I felt very comfortable there. And some people even wanted my business card when they found out I was an astrologer. So I thought, I could get some clients here. It might be worth hanging around because I'll meet some people that might become clients. I ended up in a class of people who were going to be confirmed in this church. Now, I was not planning to be confirmed, but someone told me about the class, and I thought it would be interesting. And so I was going to this class, and around this time, I started getting this impression that God didn't like astrology. Now, nobody told me this. This was this impression that God didn't like it, but I ignored it. And within a few weeks, I got an impression that God wanted me to give it up. So this was really too much. I mean, I couldn't understand, first of all, why I should give it up. And secondly, I couldn't imagine not being an astrologer. That just was unimaginable to me. And I really resisted it. And it was so strong that I'd say about 3 weeks, I fought it. And finally, I gave up because it was so clear to me I had to give it up. Now, at this point, I'm still totally, I'm a New Ager. I don't understand really who God is. I don't understand why astrology is wrong. And yet I give it up. I actually give it up. I have all these clients. I'm still active at the Astrological Society. I'm scheduled to teach a class. I'm on several committees. I had to completely resign, and I sold my books, and I had to find other teachers. Actually, I was chairperson of the curriculum committee at the Astrological Society. I was in charge of all the classes and finding teachers. So I had to stop that and get somebody else. And my clients would call, and I'd have to tell them I'm not doing astrology anymore. And if they would ask why, I said, well, I'm not sure, but I think somehow it's separating me from God. That was the only thing that I could understand about it. And so they would say, how? And I'd say, I don't know. I don't really understand it. So I'm not sure what all these people thought. They probably thought I was crazy or something, but I did not know how to explain what was happening to me. And this time when I gave astrology up was the night before Thanksgiving. And so I thought, since I'm not doing astrology, I guess I'll read the Bible. And why I thought that, I don't know, but I started reading Matthew, chapter 1, verse 1, and I decided I would just read it, in order, because I'm like a very organized person, so I have to do things in order. So I'm just reading along a little bit every night. I don't really understand what any of it means, but I keep reading it, and I notice as I'm reading that there's something about the words that are very pure to me. And that's the only word I could think of. I kept thinking, why are the words in this book so different from other books? There's something really pure about the words that I've never encountered in any book that I've read. And so that kept me reading, that purity kept me reading. And one evening, about 5 days before Christmas, or 4 days before Christmas, I was in Matthew 8. That's how slow I was going. And I was reading the passage about Jesus on the boat and the storm and how the disciples are scared, and Jesus rebukes the sea and the wind, and it becomes calm. And I read this several times because there was something about that encounter that captured me, and as I was rereading it, God just opened my eyes, and I saw who Jesus really was for the first time. I realized I had been on this spiritual path that was going away from God, that I had been wrong, that if I had died, I would have gone to hell. All of this became very clear to me, like in a few seconds, the space of a few seconds. And I just turned my life over to Christ. And at that moment, I knew I was a new person. And I knew I was a Christian. And it was very, very strange. It was a very strange experience because there was no one for me to ask, to talk to about this, to ask about it. I didn't really feel I could talk to anyone at the church I was going to. And actually later when I tried to explain it, I got very strange responses. Like people asked me, why did you give astrology up? Like, what's wrong with astrology? Why did you give it up? It was just a very strange time. And I was working at that job, right? And he had me there because of my astrology. Well, my boss, it just so happens, was away on a leave of absence, and he wasn't coming back till January. So in January, when he came back, I had to tell him, I can't do this work anymore that you want me to do because I've given astrology up and I'm a Christian. Now, I don't think he really understood at all, but he was very nice, and he let me stay and gave me busy work, and he didn't ask me to do the other kind of stuff. So at least I was able to stay there for a while. I eventually left that job and left Atlanta shortly after that year. But I was there for a while, and while I was still at that office, in April, now I've been a Christian since almost Christmas, the Christmas before. In April, this young man comes into my office, and he was a Christian, and I knew he was a Christian. He had befriended me, and he had been very nice to me and talked to me. He never tried to tell me anything. I mean, he never said anything to me that made me feel uncomfortable. He never tried to tell me I was wrong. He never tried to tell me I needed Jesus or anything. He didn't preach at me. He would just ask me questions. And he came into my office one day, and I had gone and told him I'd become a Christian earlier. And he just kind of smiled. He didn't say anything. Well, this day he came in the office, and I said to him, I can't believe that I'm a Christian. I said, a few months ago I was an astrologer, and now I'm a Christian. And I said, it still just boggles my mind. And he kind of smiled, and he said, maybe someone was praying for you. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, no, I don't know anybody who would pray for me. I'm looking right at him, right? I said, I don't know anybody who'd pray for me. And he's just smiling. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I said, wait a minute, Jeff. His name was Jeff. I said, Jeff, were you praying for me? And he said, my young adult group at my church have been praying for you. We prayed for you starting last year, and we prayed all year. So they were praying for me that year when all those strange things happened. And this is how I found out about it. I don't know if he would have ever told me if I hadn't said what I said, but that's how I found out. I'm glad I found out, because that's a big piece of the puzzle for me, at least as a Christian, about what prayer is and how God wants us to pray. So that's the story of what happened. As you can tell, I didn't do anything to get out of it. I mean, I wasn't trying to leave astrology. I wasn't disillusioned or anything.
Can you, that's awesome. Can you give us some boundaries? Because New Age is like, when we studied Buddhism, it was kind of like that too, where what is Buddhism? It depends which Buddhist you ask. Hinduism, similar. Can you give us some parameters, though, of what constitutes New Age versus actual Buddhist or something else?
Right, okay. Yeah, and this is the really hard part here is trying to define the New Age. I define it as a network of beliefs that draw from Gnosticism, Eastern spirituality, and New Thought. It draws from all of those, and it can be any combination. And people can combine any of those areas, or they can sort of focus on one area. This would also include occult, what I call occult activities, and I do make a distinction between the New Age and the occult, but they're very much connected. And people in the New Age a lot of them tend to also be into or interested in occult practices. And by occult, I mean things like contacting the dead, astrology, tarot cards. And then, of course, there's magic or sorcery, which tends to be more specialized area. You don't find a lot of New Agers into that. But there's a lot of overlap in these areas. So the difference is, for example, I was into Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, but I wasn't like a Zen Buddhist in Japan or a Tibetan Buddhist in Tibet, because here it's partially westernized, and it comes through a Western filter. So New Agers who get into Eastern spirituality are partly westernizing it often, or they apply it in a Western way, because our culture is very, very individualistic. We're very individualized. The fact that we're individuals is an important thing to us in this culture. So we can tailor things our own way. Whereas in Eastern countries, it's more corporate, and the religion is very much part of the culture. And so you don't really explore or adapt. You kind of follow it the way it is, or the way it's given to you. or you follow it through a teacher. So that's one difference, is that the New Age Buddhist, for example, is going to also read about Buddhism, read books by, they may read some books by Easterners, but they'll read books by Westerners too. And some of these people, like Alan Watts, who's a very famous writer on Buddhism and who was a follower of Zen Buddhism, he supposedly, according to Buddhist experts, he injected some of his own ideas into Zen Buddhism. And so some Zen Buddhists would say what Alan Watts presented in his books is not pure Zen Buddhism. But a lot of New Agers will read Alan Watts and they'll take on his ideas. So it's not a pure example of the religion. On the other hand, it's kind of interesting because while that's true, there's another side to it. And that is New Agers who get into maybe an Eastern religion like Hinduism or Buddhism often know more about it than the people in the country that those religions are from. So, for example, if you went to India and you wanted to have this philosophical conversation with somebody, a random person who was following Hindu rituals, and you wanted to talk about the meaning of how we're all part of the same energy, or we're all one, or reincarnation, often they're not thinking on those things. What they're doing is a very cultural form of the religion, which is outward rituals. So they have, gods that they pay homage to. They do it because they feel protected or they'll get luck that way. It's a very superstitious kind of level. Now, I'm not saying this is true for everybody, but this is kind of very common. And it's the same thing in Japan. If you just go talk to a regular Japanese person, unless they're very philosophically oriented or they're very religious about Buddhism, they're not even going to know a lot of what you know, because the culture is so soaked in the religion that just doing the outward things makes you feel that you're part of it. Is that making sense? I don't know if that's making sense or not.
Yeah.
Because, like Zen Buddhism has these very, very specific ideas. Well, Buddhism doesn't believe there's a self. So you have no actual self. There's no individual self at all that exists. And if you go and start to talk to a Buddhist about it, I mean, they may have heard that, but I don't know that they really process it unless they have a reason to do it. So the way religion is done in those countries, it's just different from the way New Agers would do it here. And I get a lot of this, not just from reading, but from talking to missionaries in those countries, people that are missionaries there. So there's a lot of ritual and outward things that they do, but they don't necessarily get into the deeper thinking of it. Whereas a lot of New Agers, if they're serious, that's what they get into. They get into these ideas, and because that's what they're drawn to. They're drawn to the ideas because there aren't any really rituals around in our culture to join in. So they get drawn to the philosophical side of the religion. So I don't know if I really explained the differences or not. Does that make sense to you people, to you guys?
I think so. We have a hand up that
Okay.
has a question.
Hopefully you can see me over here. Hey, so thank you for sharing all that. So retrospectively, looking at all of what you did through astrology, and looking back at some of the ways you were helping people back then with, I guess a lot of it was either predicting the future or helping kind of guide them in what their next steps should be in whatever situations they're in. Did you get a sense that, kind of looking back on it, that any of it really materialized the way that you felt that you were able to contribute, to the conversation with that person? And B, where do you think the source of that came from? Was that, you hear a lot of folks that say, well, they're pretending to be astrologists and they're really good at reading people and they can make things up as the conversation's going along. Was that more what you saw in astrology, or did you feel at the time sincerely you were tapping into some insight?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. I really totally believed in the truth of astrology. I believed that it was a guide for the person. The chart, their birth chart was a picture, a blueprint of their life, why they were here, the lessons that they were here to learn, their future potential, their relationship issues, issues with their family, with their parents, with their children, if they had children, etc. And all of this is in the chart. Like, the chart is like extremely complicated. It's you could theoretically sit and interpret a chart, I don't know, theoretically maybe for years and never come to the end of it. Really, it's there's like so many roads to go down. So I felt when I was reading the chart for the person, I was not paying attention to the person. I was looking at the chart. I also did charts for people I never met. I did them by tape. I would get requests to do a chart, maybe as a birthday gift for somebody, and I would be given the person's birth date and birthplace and their first name. And I would know nothing about them, and I would do the chart and look at the chart, and then I would tape my reading, my interpretation on the tape recorder and send the tape off. And I did quite a few like that. The feedback was always very positive, that it hit the nail on the head, that I knew exactly what was going on in their life, etc. So I was not reading people. In fact, it actually bothered me to do a chart for someone I knew. It bothered me because I would know things about them, and I felt that was interfering with my understanding of the chart. So I actually preferred doing charts for strangers. Now, I did do some charts for people I knew, but I much preferred doing charts for strangers, people I knew nothing about. Obviously, I know their age, and I know if they're male or female. So there's certain things that go along with that when you're talking to someone who's 24 versus 44. You know they're in a different life period and dealing with different issues. And that I'm sure affected a lot of the things I said. But actually looking at the chart, I would start interpreting the position of the planets and the houses they were in, etc., and the zodiac signs and their relationship to each other. And as I got into the chart, after the first few minutes, I would feel guided through the chart. So I would feel that I was being led through the chart as to where in the chart to go, and sometimes what to say. And very often I would say something and the person would say, I can't believe you know that. I can't believe you can tell that from the chart. I remember one time I was looking at the chart, and it was, I think it was the planet Neptune in the 4th house, which is childhood, and next to the moon, which is mother, and there were probably some other aspects there. And I said, you were not close to your mother when you were young, and you felt that she was absent, or she was absent, and she was not a stable person. This person just looked so shocked that I said that, and she said, I can't believe you see that in my chart. My mother was mentally ill and was away a big part of my childhood because she had to go into these asylums. I said, well, it's here in your chart. See? So these kind of things happen that confirmed astrology to me. Now, there were many times I would say something and it would be very open-ended, so the person would then hear that and say, oh yes, that must be the time when my husband was very sick or something like that. So there were all these different factors at play there. Now, one of the big factors was my spirit guide, and I do feel that. No, I don't feel this. I know that astrologers, psychics, card readers, mediums, they all have spirit guides, and they are all led by their spirit guides in the reading. What are spirit guides? They're fallen angels. That's what they are, which I'm sure you've guessed by now. And fallen angels can know what's going on in a person's life. They can know about the person's past. they feed that information to the psychic or the astrologer or the tarot card reader, and I definitely feel like I was fed information. Sometimes a picture would come into my head, and it would be very specific, and I would share it with a person, and they would say, yes, that's true. How did you know it? Well, it would just come into my head, just like a flash of light. It was basically a psychic experience, and my psychic abilities were very strong as I did astrology more and more. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't really have psychic abilities. I'm using that as a term of convenience. What it was is this demonic guidance, is what it is.
Marcia?
Yes.
I was going to ask you, because I was listening for it in your testimony, as you got closer to accepting Christ, and especially when you accepted Christ, did your spirit guide fight back? Did you sense a personality inside of you that was interacting?
I don't think my spirit guide was in me.
Okay.
I don't think I was ever, and see, possession is not a necessity for this.
Okay.
You can have guidance from demons when you're into these areas. You don't have to be possessed. I think possession is an extreme. And I've actually changed my views on that quite a bit. I'm not sure that it even exists today, which I know is kind of a far out view. But you're guided. You have these guides, and people who have been in the New Age and have guides will talk about it the same as I do. It's like these people that you know that are kind of in your head, or they're with you, and you feel like they're friends, and they're giving you guidance. You don't feel. Now, some people become controlled by their guides. That has happened. That did not happen to me. And in that case, you may go to a case of possession. But what I felt was there were some things that happened towards the end of this journey before I actually trusted Christ. There were some things that happened, like my chiropractor, who was a witch, invited me to join a coven that she was starting. And I was lying on the table on my back because she was working on me. And when she asked me this, I just felt like it was very strange. I mean, it was like this kind of battle. I felt like something like pressing on me, and I felt sort of panicked. And I said, no, thank you, but I really don't think that that's my path to be an astrologer in a coven. I don't know if she was asking me to become, get into Wicca or witchcraft, or she just wanted me to be an astrologer and be part of the coven as an astrologer. I'm not sure, but I just didn't want to do it. That was kind of a strange thing that happened. And what I'm describing here were like what I see now is like these battles. Another time I was speaking at the Astrological Society. We were having Astrology Awareness Day, which we had every year around Halloween. Now, it just so happens, you may find it interesting that my birthday is Halloween. And not only that, my son was born on Halloween. And he was born 2 weeks early. And I was not expecting him to be born on Halloween because that was not his date to be born. So that was a big surprise when he was born on my birthday. But I saw, of course, all of these psychic connections and past life reincarnation connections. So I was speaking at Astrology Awareness Day, and I was talking to a group of people. We did this for the public. So the people coming are people in the public. They aren't clients. They aren't necessarily know anything about astrology. I'm giving a little lecture on the 12 signs of the zodiac and what they really mean. And all of a sudden, this is one of the most bizarre things that ever happened to me. I wanted to say, we shouldn't be here. Let's all just go home. And the words were like right in my mouth. It was like right here, and it was like I was about to come out. I was about to say it. We shouldn't be here. Let's just go home. And I had to fight not to say it. I mean, I was struggling. It was like man, I just don't know if I can keep from saying that. It was a really, really weird thing, but I managed not to say it. It was very hard, very difficult. I didn't understand why that was happening. Why would I say such a thing? You know, it was very bizarre. Now, as far as my spirit guide goes, about, okay, I was saved right before Christmas. So that's late December. Now we're into March. I left that church, and I won't go into that. That's a whole other story. I left that church I had been in. I started going to another church, which was better than that first church, but still not really all that great. I didn't really know how to find a good church. You know, anyway, God used this church I went to. So I decided I needed to join and make a public declaration that I was a Christian. I wanted to be baptized, and the minister wouldn't baptize me because I'd been baptized when I was 11. Well, I wasn't a believer, so it wasn't a real baptism, but he still wouldn't baptize me. It was a Disciples of Christ church. They have funny views on baptism. So anyway, I'm going to join this church. I'm planning it. During this time, around this time, my spirit guide came to me. I got very, very sick. And I was in my room, and I knew he was there. And I knew he was really wanting to kill me. I didn't see him, but I knew he was there. There was this hostility towards me that was very strong. This hate, it was hatred. And so I spoke to him. Now, I don't recommend speaking to demons. Now, I tell people we can talk to Christ, but I was a really, really new believer. And I said to him, you know, and I felt that he had made me sick, because I had gotten sick, that I got sick on the day that I joined the church. And when I was at the church, I was fine. And then before I went forward to join is when I started getting sick, and I got increasingly sick. It was this, I don't know how to explain it. It was like this dizziness and weakness, and it got so bad I had to go home and go to bed. And I felt like he had caused it. I don't know. But anyway, I said to him, you know, I belong to Christ now, and there's nothing you can do about it. And even if you kill me, all that's going to happen is that I'm going to go be with Jesus. As soon as I said that, he was gone. I mean, instantly. All of a sudden, it was all quiet. It was all peaceful. I knew it was it. And that was it with him. And of course, I can't prove any of this. This is all just subjective experience. But you asked me the question, so there you go.
We're asking you subjective questions.
Did I answer that other gentleman's question about?
Well, he has a follow-up question, so.
Okay.
So I'm curious if you know, there was a book written by Dr. James Kennedy back in the 1980s called The Gospel and the Stars. And it talks about God creating the astrological signs to tell the story of the gospel. Did you ever see if there was any merit in that?
I have explored that. Not only that, but actually I was on the program Dr. Kennedy produced, his TV show, and they put my testimony on the program where he talked about that book. And I didn't know they were going to do that. They, I knew they were going to have me on as part of the TV segment, but I didn't know it was going to be attached to his talk about I think it's The Real Meaning of the Zodiac,
yes.
I think was the name of his book.
Yep.
And they gave me a copy. That was probably around 1993 or something, and I had already started exploring this idea because I came across a Christian book about the gospel and the stars, which struck me as very strange. Now, I didn't do enough investigation at the time. My initial reaction was, this is completely wrong, but I didn't know how to explain it was wrong. Since then, I've had to spend a lot of time on this because I was asked this at a lot of conferences and talks where I, started speaking. Yeah, it's totally faulty. There is no basis for this whatsoever. There's a very complex background to it. It goes back to some people in the 1800s that were writing about this gospel in the stars, and they were using data, some of it that was erroneous. So they were using erroneous data or making erroneous connections. There is no astronomical basis for it, and there's no biblical basis for it. Because one of the ideas is that God gave this gospel in the stars to Adam before the fall. Okay, that makes no sense at all. Of course, it's not recorded in Scripture. There's nothing in Scripture that supports the gospel in the stars. The verses that are used out of context, or they're just completely misinterpreted. Like God calls each star by its name. That doesn't support the gospel in the stars. That means that because God made the stars, He knows every single star. He knows all of the thousands and tens of thousands of stars, whereas we can't even count them. We don't even know how many stars there are. And there are people who are adherents of the gospel in the stars, and they have websites. And I have come across some of them at conferences, and they're very fanatical, and they want me to agree with them because I was an astrologer. And they try their hardest to convince me, but I have explored all of the facts, and it doesn't wash, and it's not biblical. Number one, special revelation is not in nature. Nature is general revelation. In Romans 1, it tells us that we can see there is a creator because of creation. And because of the vastness of creation, we know this creator is bigger than what is created. We know he's bigger and more powerful than anything we can see in creation. That's general revelation, and we're all accountable for recognizing there's a creator God. But there's nothing about the gospel in nature. Nature doesn't give the gospel. The gospel has to come through special revelation through God's word. So to say there's a gospel in the stars is to say that nature somehow, has the gospel. Also, the names of the zodiac, those names came from, they're Latin names that came from the Greek gods. And it doesn't apply to, for example, Chinese astrology or Native American astrology, which are completely different systems from Western astrology. They aren't the same. They don't have the same names. The zodiac signs don't have the same names, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't have an article on this on my website because there's some articles already written that it's very technical and it's very hard to explain, and I don't know the real history of it. There's people back in the 1800s. It's hard for me to even remember their names. But there is a former astrologer who has an article that was published that is online, and he addresses this. His name has gone out of my head. I know him. I'll think of it, and I can send the link to Eric, and he can give it to you. But there's more than his article, but his is probably one of the better ones, and he was also a professional astrologer who became a Christian. I don't know why his name's gone out of my head. I haven't really thought about him in a long time. I think he's living in the UK. So there's a lot of things wrong with this idea of the gospel and the stars. And, it's too bad to me. It's just one of those things. It actually, to me, downgrades the Bible.
Marsha, I have a question.
Downgrades God's word.
I have a question that piggybacks off of that. And I like how you're bringing in general and special revelation, because we've talked about that in the class here. Later on, I want to ask you about, does apologetics play any role in reaching a New Ager? But right now, because we're talking about that book and some other things, can you discuss other ways that the New Age has crept into the church in practice or in belief?
Yes. Oh, yes, I just thought of something else I wanted to say before I forget. I am on Facebook, and I've done some Facebook posts on the gospel and the stars. And if you're on Facebook, you can message me or something, and I can find it. And I have a link to that guy's article that I was talking about in the post. I've done at least probably 4 different Facebook posts on that topic.
Marcia, I'll put you in our group. We have a closed group for the class. I
Yeah.
don't know if I've added you yet, but well, you're a friend of ours on Facebook. All I have to do is add you to the group, and that way everybody can ask really blunt questions. It's a closed group, so that we can do that.
Oh, and also you're a very good writer.
Yeah.
I've appreciated your posts. They're
Oh,
very
thank
thorough.
you.
You have a gift of writing. It's really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
amazing.
Somebody said that I can't see, but I could hear her.
That was my wife.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so I can, you know, I'm kind of realizing now, wait a minute, you know, I know I did some posts on that. I didn't write articles on that topic, but I do have a link to the astrologer's article, the guy I was talking about. I hate it when I can't remember somebody's name. I'll probably remember it like right after we finish everything. And
Want me to hang up and then call you back? Then you'll remember it?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things, it doesn't, when you want to remember, it doesn't come, and then later it does.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, you asked me a question. I forgot what you asked me.
Oh, just if you can talk about ways that New Age beliefs or New Age practices have crept
Oh.
into the church,
the church.
evangelical church, in ways we might not be aware of.
Okay. Well, this is a big one, and I get a lot of people mad at me for saying this, but this is the biggest way the New Age has come in the church is through alternative healing. It is the number one way. I have been watching this and observing this since 1993. And I deal with it every day on Facebook. I do a lot of posts on it. Alternative healing is called alternative because it's not medical. That's why it's called alternative. It doesn't have a scientific basis. It can't be proved scientifically. You know, it can't stand up to scrutiny. It's based, and most alternative healing is based on spiritual beliefs. And so I would, what is included in alternative healing are things like acupuncture, reflexology, homeopathy, iridology, applied kinesiology, and I'm finding that Christians are really into these things. I was really shocked in the late 90s when I came across some women who were doing homeopathy, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, why in the world are you doing homeopathy? Homeopathy is based on occultism. It's based on the occult. It's based on the view. The man who founded homeopathy, Hahnemann, was influenced by New Thought, which is one of the ingredients of the New Age. He believed in vitalism, that there's this vital life force in the plants, and he also believed that water would hold the memory of something. So if you put a substance into water and you shake it, the more you shake it and dilute it, the more powerful it becomes. So homeopathy is also illogical because it's based on the belief that the more diluted it is, the more powerful it is. Now this is just insane. I'm sorry, it's so hard for me. It's so hard for me to deal with a topic like this because it's like somebody telling me birds can't fly, and we're standing there watching birds fly. I just don't understand how anyone can accept this idea. The more you dilute it, the more powerful it becomes. It's based on an occult idea that the water is holding the memory of it when you're shaking it. So homeopathy basically, in most cases, not always, in most cases is so diluted the original substance isn't even in the final product. You go down there and they have this stuff at the drugstore, which really bothers me, and you pay $12 for some little bottle of pills that's for whatever, arthritis or whatever, and there's nothing in it. I mean, you might as well eat sugar cubes. Okay, so I'm sorry, I kind of got off on homeopathy. It's one of my pet peeves. Reflexology. Have you all heard of reflexology?
Oh, yeah.
Now, a lot of people think reflexology is just foot massage, but it's not. Reflexology comes from Taoism. In China, they were not allowed to do autopsies. They didn't really know where things in the body were. And so they believe parts of the body reflected the organs. So they believed that parts of your ear, parts of your hand, and the bottoms of your feet were connected or represented organs in your body. So reflexology in this country is mostly done on the feet, and they believe that these different reflexologists, who are mostly New Agers, believe that different parts of your body, if they touch a certain part, that's going to affect your liver, and if they rub another part, it's going to help your lungs, and another part's going to help your heart. Well, nothing on the bottom of your feet connects to your organs. This is medically impossible. It's just not true. It might feel good. Actually, real reflexology hurts. I've had it done to me. I had it done to me when I was in the New Age by massage therapists. Massage therapy is another area, New Age area, because all massage therapy schools in this country teach New Age beliefs. They teach some things that are physical, but they all teach it with a New Age worldview. So I'm always warning people about massage therapists, because a lot of them are into energy healing. They believe that certain areas, when you get pain in certain areas, it's related to maybe something in your life. Their views are just not based on facts. They're not based on the body. So I'm finding that. Okay, let me say this. What I think is happening, the most dangerous thing I see happening in the church, as far as related to my ministry, is that and this may not be true at your church, and I hope it isn't, but it's very widespread, there is a growing anti-science, anti-medical attitude among Christians. It's very strong, and because of this anti-medical, anti-science attitude, they're open to these other views, these alternative views, and they're all, instead of going to doctors, they're going to chiropractors. Well, chiropractic is not medical. Chiropractors are not doctors, and it's not based on medical facts. So a lot of chiropractors are into New Age practices. Naturopathy is even worse. Naturopathy is not based on medical things at all. A lot of Christians are going to naturopaths, and they get this advice that's basically New Age, and then they think that it's okay, and it opens the door more and more to go down these New Age areas. And now what I'm seeing, which I never thought I would see, is an acceptance of energy healing. And in fact, I just found out about this 2 days ago. I was emailed by somebody at a large Christian ministry, and I've spoken there, and she emailed me because she received an inquiry from someone in their organization who had received an email, and he didn't know about it, and he sent it to her, and he said, "Do you know anything about this?" And she sent it to me and said, "Marcia, do you know anything about this?" Well, it's this man in Texas who's a member of Gateway Church, a very big church in Texas. I think it's in Fort Worth, although I'm not sure about that. And his name is King, Glenn King. He has this big institute, and he does bioelectromagnetic energy healing. And of course, what he does is he says this is not New Age, this is not energy healing, this is all based on physics. Well, it's not. It's not based on science at all. Yet he's charging for it. He has classes teaching people how to do it. And this is an evangelical, this is an evangelical guy, supposedly. And I'm sure all these people coming to the classes, a lot of them might be from that church, I don't know. But there's this acceptance of energy healing. Now, energy healing falls under the category of the occult. And basically, it's related to sorcery. This is how psychics heal. Psychics and witches heal with energy. That's what all these things are: therapeutic touch, healing touch, touch for health. These are all forms of energy healing. Reiki is another one. I have an article on Reiki on my website. And what's happening in the church is that people are taking the ideas, and then they're changing the terms. And they're making them sound scientific so that it sounds credible. But changing the terms doesn't change the nature of the beast. You're still dealing with an occult form of healing. And trying to make it scientific doesn't make it science. It's just pseudoscience.
What about,
I have never seen so many Christians fall into the New Age than I have through this. The other area is yoga.
Yoga,
Yeah.
that's what I thought you were gonna say.
that's my, yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah, yoga
in
and,
therapy, they
martial
all
arts is taught,
go to
you know,
Jesus.
Yoga
Eastern traditions.
and also just contemplative spirituality is another area. Yoga, of course, is intrinsically, it's in Hinduism. It's a form of spiritual, it's a path to spiritual enlightenment. And yoga, there are many forms of yoga. The yoga that we're most familiar with here is Hatha yoga, is the physical yoga, that the yoga classes and everything we all know about that has just become so popular now in our culture. But the positions honor various Hindu gods, and you are also, the positions are they supposedly affect the chakras. Now the chakras are the system of, that means wheels, so it's supposedly these 7 wheels of energy from the base of the spine to the top of the head. And the positions in yoga are supposed to help open up the chakras. It's all based on a spiritual belief system. Now, I know a lot of Christians who do yoga because they say they're only doing it for exercise, and they aren't accepting the beliefs that go along with it. But the problem is you can't really progress in yoga without getting into the spirituality. You might be able to do the basic stuff, maybe a basic class without it being too spiritual, but eventually it has to be. And actually, if you're doing the breathing techniques, which is called pranayama, if you're doing that, those are done actually to induce a meditative state. So when you're in this meditative state, you're very open to whatever influence. And somehow yoga has, because it has a spiritual dimension to it, and this is just my view, I believe that it does something to the person to open them up to Eastern or New Age spirituality. And I cannot tell you how many emails and messages I've received on Facebook from people who have family members who started off in yoga and eventually just got into the New Age. They got so entranced with yoga, and they got attracted to the spirituality behind it, and they became like a New Ager now.
What about
Christian to begin with or not, I don't know.
the other question I have is, I come from a sales background, self-help, name it, claim it, positive energy, power of positive thinking. I find that a lot in Christian circles as well, motivational. Can you help us weed through that? Is there a danger there? How do you, obviously you want to keep your head up, but
Yeah.
when do you cross the line?
Yeah, there is self-help in the culture as well. It's big in the culture. Now, I want to make a distinction here between the self-help and positive thinking of New Thought and the name it and claim it. Those are two different things. I know they sound the same, but the name it and claim it is part of the Word of Faith cult. It's a cult within the church. I do not deal with Word of Faith. It's not connected to my ministry. It has to be addressed completely differently because it has to do with their theology. They have a faulty theology of God, they have a faulty theology of Jesus, and they have a faulty theology of the Holy Spirit. So that's what needs to be addressed in the Word of Faith church. And the name it and claim it thing is just a symptom of their faulty theology. Now, as far as the positive thinking goes, that was, of course, made popular by Norman Vincent Peale. And he was a minister at a very large church in New York City. And so I guess what happened when his book was popular is that because he was perceived as a Christian minister, a lot of Christians thought this was Christian, and it got into the church. I know when I was growing up, I used to hear some of these things from my mother, because she would say things like, you have to believe in yourself. God wants us to believe in ourselves. And that's a very much of a New Thought kind of thing. And you have to be positive about everything. So I tend to think she was influenced by this. I don't know for sure, but thinking on some things she said. And so at the time, I thought that was Christianity. I thought Christianity was about having confidence in yourself and believing in yourself and kind of making yourself good for God so that you could be successful. You had to be successful to please God. Now, what Norman Vincent Peale was doing is that he studied the teachings of a man named Ernest Holmes, Holmes. Ernest Holmes was the co-founder of the Church of Religious Science, which is now called Centers for Spiritual Living. It has a new name. And it came out of the New Thought movement. And the New Thought movement, which really took off in the 1800s and into the early 20th century, called itself Christian. It described itself as Christian. They used the Bible. They talked about Jesus, but everything they said was completely contrary to Christian beliefs, because they believed Jesus was just a man who realized he had an inner divine nature. And by realizing this, he was able to use this divine nature. He reached Christ consciousness. And everybody can do this. He did it as an example for everybody. So this is a New Thought teaching about Jesus. They also believe that we're all part of God. We all came from God, and we have this divine nature in us. And because of that, we have the ability to transcend our human limitations and be anything we want. We can achieve anything. And these are the kind of things you hear from these people like Tony Robbins and these other big motivational speakers who are very popular in the culture. They say you can achieve anything. You can achieve your dream. You have no limits once you believe in yourself. So all of that kind of thinking comes from New Thought. And it's very popular in our culture, and it's in a lot of the self-help literature. And unfortunately, yes, it is in the church. And I think where I see it are things like, only it's redefined in Christian terms, so it sounds biblical. God has a dream for you. What's God's dream for you? Follow that dream. This is all about succeeding, how God wants you to succeed. See, when you can put it in these Christian terms, so it's Christianized, and then people they don't find it foreign or strange, and it sounds biblical. So a lot of times what's happening with these New Thought ideas is that they're put into Christian terms and redefined. It's just that's the main way deception gets in, is that it gets in through new terms or being redefined or being used with Christian language or verses taken out of context to support it in the Bible.
As you know, apologetics is needed to evangelize, but it's also needed within the church. And as you were talking about the homeopathic stuff and the all that, I know several people in my life who talk like that.
I know like dozens and
Oh,
dozens from
it's
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
So prominent, and the response is always like, whatever the response is, apologetics is necessary in the church, is my point. What can we do to help our friends and family that are, and ourselves, I'm learning new things that I didn't realize were rooted in the occult or rooted in New Age. What can we do to help? Because they're going to tune us out if we start saying, hey, that's cultic. They're just going to tune us out. So can you give us some practical tactics? Maybe ask them to come read something on your website or...
Are you talking about talking to Christians or non-Christians?
Right now I'm talking about getting this out of the church, exposing New Age and cultic practices and thoughts within the church? What are some practical
I'm telling
ways?
you, Eric, I tell you, I've kind of given up on that, to tell you the truth, because I find that Christians who are into this do not want the facts. They do
Yeah.
not want to listen. If they don't want to listen, there's nothing you can say to them. I find them very, very resistant because they've either had some kind of experience that convinces them this is okay, or they've had a bad experience with the medical, industry or whatever, and so they're turned off from that. I basically, in fact, I've had to be very strict on my Facebook pages when I put these posts up, and I tell people, I'm very strict. If you try to argue with me, I'm deleting your comment. I just won't. I don't want to take the time to argue with these people anymore. If you have Christians into this and they don't want to hear the facts, I'm sorry. There's nothing you can say to them. If they're willing to have the facts, then you can say, I can show you why this is not based on facts, and it's actually based on spiritual views that are contrary to Christianity or to the Bible. And if they're willing, if they're like, really? Is that true? Because maybe they don't know, and maybe they'll listen to you. Now, some people do listen. I shouldn't act like nobody listens. I'm sorry. I've just had some really, really difficult experiences on Facebook. I get attacked so often. Sometimes I get a little extreme here in my response, so please forgive me. But I still put the facts out there because I figure maybe there's somebody who really wants them. And some people who aren't really into this but might be interested and are wondering will want the facts. And then they'll say, I'm glad that you gave me this information because I didn't know it. So what you have to first find out is if they want the information. So you can say, that particular thing that you're doing, do you know what it's based on? Do you know it's based on Taoism? Do you know? Then you might have to tell them what Taoism is, which is an ancient Chinese religion, and there's no God. There's just the Tao. Everything is the Tao. I have an article on my website on Taoism. I can't remember the title of it, but if you go under topics and look under T, I can put that link up, or you can find it. I think it's Tao and God, but I can't remember now. Since I'm doing the Skype thing, I can't look it up. I do have an article on it, a short article. You can say this is from another religion, and it's based on spiritual views. I think that's the best way to present it. And just say, do you know this is not based on facts? But I don't even say science anymore because I get so many negative reactions from Christians when I say science. Isn't that sad? Because science actually is the discovery of the laws God has in creation. That's what science is. It's the discovery of and the study of the laws that God has put in creation. The law of gravity, all the different ways our body works, discovering that. Those are all systems that God put in place, and science is discovering that.
You talk about something that is interesting, because I didn't think about these topics being connected, but the pummeling we received for 150 years, starting with Darwinism, and then just all of our responses that have fallen flat, culturally at least, there is a very anti-science, or at least very science-suspicious attitude within the church, don't you think? I mean, we talk about with stuff that we've done in class, with creation evolution and things like that. I mean, what responsibility do those groups and individuals who are constantly berating scientists as though that's what they're doing? It seems like we need to stop that.
Yeah, and we need to separate science from scientists.
Right.
Because there's scientists who, are taking theories and their own personal beliefs and making statements about things that they can be wrong, and they can be prejudiced by their own beliefs.
Like Richard Dawkins.
Or whatever it is. If they're an atheist, then they might be prejudiced against anything supernatural or against God being the creator. But that's the scientist, that's not science. And I think that that's one of the problems, is that there's not a distinction being made between science and the scientist, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Frank Turek has a talk that is titled Science doesn't say anything, scientists do. You heard that one?
I know Frank, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
That's one of his famous things, scientists, science doesn't say anything, scientists do. Yeah, that's a good, in fact, I've quoted that, that's a good quote
What is
from
her
Frank.
thoughts on,
So we got a question here.
what is her thoughts on, Dr. Phil and
Oprah?
I didn't quite hear her.
some of the talk shows?
Like, kind of like the self-help stuff we were talking about, but specifically she asked about famous talk show hosts like Dr. Phil, Oprah.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Phil, I think he's technically Methodist. I haven't really spent a lot of time on him. He's a psychologist, and it seems he has embraced some of these kind of ideas that are, to me, it's more humanism than anything. And now Oprah, I know a lot more about her. I mean, Oprah is a follower of New Thought. And she says her view of Jesus changed when she read a book by a Unity minister named Eric Butterfield. He died in 2003. But there was a book he wrote I think it's called Discover the Power Within You. I've actually read the book. I read it several years ago. She said that changed her view about Jesus, and she no longer believed Jesus died on the cross for sins, but that he came to teach us Christ consciousness, how to achieve Christ consciousness. And she got that from Eric Butterfield. Now, Unity is another one of those churches that came out of the New Thought movement. In fact, it's probably the most influential one. The third one is the Christian Science Church. And those all came out of the New Thought movement. And when I've listened to Oprah many, many times. This is why she supports so many New Agers. It's because of her New Thought beliefs. And the New Age adopted a lot of New Thought beliefs. And so there's a big overlap there. Now, there's still a distinction between the two. New Thought is it's more narrow in scope. The New Age is a lot vaster and open-ended and includes more things. But because it has New Thought in it, there's a lot of overlap, and she's open to New Age ideas. And that's why she's promoted all these New Agers like Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and everything. So, Oprah's I would classify her as New Thought.
Okay, well, I didn't realize it was 8:02 already. We're having too much fun.
I know, I'm just getting
Just starting.
Here.
Any last questions, comments?
I do. I have
Okay,
a couple.
Sheila has a quick question.
I work with a New Ager, and she's really weird to me. I don't know how to talk to her. I mean, she has come to me, and I have talked to her about the whole gospel, but she just doesn't get it. I don't know I don't know how to talk to these people. I mean,
Yes.
except pray for them.
Pray, definitely pray. Yes, it can be very difficult. I usually recommend asking questions. Now, you've already talked to her. Usually what I tell somebody when they haven't really had a conversation is to ask questions, like, who do you think God is?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think Jesus is? You can ask her, have you asked her why Jesus came to earth?
I don't. I mean, she was raised Catholic, but she got into going to psychics, and now she goes to groups to learn more and to see with her third eye, and yeah. And then she goes to a naturopath who is a Buddhist who talks about reincarnation with her, and I mean she's just really deep into it, and I don't know. Have you asked her where she's going to go when she dies? Her father died last January, and she went to Jonathan. I think it was a psychic guy.
Jonathan Edwards?
Yes, she went to him hoping to contact her father, and she didn't get to talk to him, but she's just really deep into it.
The line was busy.
You've got to pray. You've got to pray for an opportunity and for her to be receptive.
Yeah.
Because God is the one who will open the door. You can't
Right.
push that door open. You know, she sounds very involved.
Yeah, she is.
If the subject of death comes up, you can ask her, where will you go? Because there's one thing about belief in reincarnation. If she believes that, then where do you go? Well, you go somewhere in between, and then you're set back, or you decide what life to come back to, you know, to learn your lessons. But then, okay, so then you live your life, then you die, you go back, and it repeats. What happens eventually down the road? Because the goal is to not come back. So, you know, I've asked people, well, okay, when you finally don't reincarnate anymore, then what? Where do you go? What happens? Well, for most, the idea is that you kind of merge with God. You don't have any individuality at all. Now, this isn't always the case, but that's why I ask. I ask the question to see what they're going to say. A lot of times they don't have a clear idea, and you know, and because when you ask this question, see, it really makes the person stop and think. First of all, what do I really believe, and what do I really think is eventually going to happen to me? You know, what is the end point of all of this? All of these spiritual lessons, all this reincarnation, all this karma. Well, what's the end point here? Where is it taking me? Is that what I really want? Is that true? So I usually try to get them to think that way. But, you know, you just pray for an opportunity. At least you shared the gospel with her. You never know how God's going to use that.
Speaking of
Just pray for another opportunity to talk to her and for her to be receptive.
speaking of prayer, Marcia, can we close by praying for you and your ministry?
Oh, yeah, that would be wonderful.
And
Yes.
and then thank you so much. First, let's thank you.
I hope it was helpful for you.
It was very helpful. Okay, so let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for Marcia and the ministry you've called her to, what you've taken her out of, and the boldness and the clarity of communication that you've given her, Lord. Continue to give her platforms and pray you protect her against people who would try to tear her down from within the church, like the things that she mentioned, and people outside the church. Just to protect her from those, Lord. Protect her thinking. And thank you for healing her body and letting the treatment work. We pray that it would continue in that direction. You'll keep her strong and able for a long time to come, because the church and our culture desperately need what Marcia's offering. So we thank you for her and bless her for her willingness to share. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.